Hello, Exiles. This is Ryan from Behind Eyes Gaming, and welcome to another Path of Exile 2 video. In today's video, I'm going to go over all of my opinions on kind of the feedback I have on the game after a little over 2 weeks since early access began. I do offer kind of a broader perspective. I've leveled 3 characters to the end game, one in the initial playthrough like everybody else, one in solo self-found up until yellow maps, and then one with leveling gear. And I just kind of wanted to offer my experiences and how I think possibly the game could be improved going forward. I have a lot of great things to say. Honestly, I do believe Path of Exile 2 is a phenomenal game, and it's only getting started. They're just going to iterate and they're going to refine, and I think it's going to turn out to be possibly, in my opinion, the best game of all time. That's, a big statement, but I already believe Path of Exile 1 is the best game of all time, for my personal taste at least. So I think POE 2 definitely has everything it needs to kind of take that crown and to, exceed everyone's expectations. However, currently, in this iteration, it has some glaring issues, and I'm going to go over those. Basically, the things I'm going to break down are pacing issues, and that is pacing in terms of kind of like the peaks and valleys of the difficulty curve, as well as pacing issues specifically related to character class imbalance, as well as gearing, because gearing is very interesting right now in that it can kind of be very snowbally, as in a couple of bits of good luck kind of just snowball you really hard, which is true in a lot of games, but I think it's even more so the case here. And I'll talk about specifically why I think that is. But yeah, I do think there are some issues, and the first thing I'm going to do is pull up a graph here, and I'm going to kind of demonstrate one of my issues with this. So here is a little graph. Made it in MS Paint. It's absolutely beautiful. And here are all the acts, and then white maps, yellow maps, red maps, and kind of like the pinnacle endgame. And here's the difficulty. So I'm going to go ahead and start off. I'm going to say that in the beginning, like right away when you have 0 gear, kind of starts off here. It's pretty hard. I would say moves up to hard. However, you start getting some gear and it goes down a little bit, goes down, ends up becoming pretty easy. Then right at the end you have the boss fight, and I think the boss fight is quite difficult. Little difficult for people to overcome, unless you have like a lot of cold resist and armor, because the boss does a lot of physical cold damage. Can be really tricky, or unless you happen to be following a build guide and you're using some of the skill combos that make the fight quite easy, using like crowd control, like freeze. My freeze monk doesn't have a lot of trouble, even on solo self-found. I ran it through before they buffed gear, and I still didn't have much trouble with this. But I would say, by and large, for most of the community, first boss quite hard. Get past the first boss, and I think going into Act 2, you get some kind of peaks and valleys. There's some difficult fights in the middle, like the Titan. And then you have the Dreadnought, which I think is the most insane spike in difficulty. I'm going to put it up here in the question mark. That's Dreadnought tier. In terms of both how much damage the monsters do and the density and layout of the map, I think Dreadnought is actually by far the most difficult part of the game, including bosses. In fact, you go right at the end of Act 2, go to the boss fight. I think the boss is so much easier than the Dreadnought itself that it drops way down here. Okay. Then you go into Act 3, which is actually pretty hard all throughout, honestly, until kind of the end. It never quite gets up anywhere near Dreadnought, but the reasoning for this kind of set up, this spike here, is because you generally aren't going to have a lot of chaos resistance, and there's a ton of enemies that do chaos damage in Act 3. And that makes it pretty difficult. And there's also some really hard-hitting bosses. You have the skill point monkey boss, which does a ton of damage. If you're not good at dodge rolling, or if you don't have adequate crowd control, that monkey boss can definitely kill you, and probably will kill you. There's also quite a difficult boss at the end, and I'm not talking about Doriani. I'm talking about the poison lady. I don't remember her name. She is quite tricky, especially given the chaos resistance situation again. So that's Act 3. Oh, that was actually Act 2. Well, I didn't make my graph very good, but you get the point. Then you get into, then you get down into Cruel. And once you're in Cruel, I would honestly say most of the game is pretty easy. Get a little spike up again with the Dreadnought, but for the most part, Cruel's pretty simple. Before the loot buff, Act 3 Cruel is actually a little tricky, went up. And then you get into white maps, and when you first get into white maps, on leveling gear, you know, it's not too bad, but it does get pretty hard as you start getting up into later white maps, unless you know how to gear properly. So it becomes a little bit more difficult, but then you're able to hit, I think it's around level 73, where better items start dropping. Also, you start getting, you know, your gear settled and everything, and all of a sudden, the maps just, the difficulty of maps, once you get your gear sorted, and because of the way that gear is scaled, it goes all the way down. It gets to the point where maps are absolutely trivial. Gearing in the end game is absolutely absurd. It's very easy to gear between like gambling and crafting and just finding like tiered gear. You just pick up all of your expert rares, and especially because you also get a sufficient amount of rarity, and rarity is completely imbalanced. So you end up with so many exalts, you can craft so much of your own gear. You can basically just start picking up, like in my case, like the expert quarterstaffs and all of, like, you know, your good hybrid gear. You could start gambling for amulets. I gambled 1,000,000 gold in amulets last night, and I made so many absurd amulets. I was looking for like flat ES plus percent ES, and in 1,000,000 gold, plus, you know, a bunch of regals and exalts and etc. I managed to make like 6 amulets that had at least 50 flat and at least like 45 percent ES, and that's before defense catalysts or anything. And then some of the pinnacle bosses are pretty tough. I haven't done the pinnacle boss yet. That one looks like it might go back up to up here again, but because if you don't have the ability to teleport, if you're not running like a weapon swap teleport, apparently it's impossible to dodge out of one of his abilities. So I would say this is very much how the difficulty curve works. If we would compare it to like Path of Exile 1, you would have a very sharp difficulty in the first couple acts. Like in Path of Exile 1, you probably get like close to the in the beginning, and then it goes down and down and down, and maybe, like, you know, you get a couple of spikes here and there, a couple of bosses are tough, and then it gradually climbs in difficulty up through maps. So you get kind of a much more clean graph in Path of Exile 1, whereas Path of Exile 2 has these insane spikes, and you have points where it's like almost comically easy. So that's kind of my take on that. So there's a couple of factors I think that kind of contribute to this. So I'm going to talk about those a little bit. One of which is defenses, and I also have a paint for defenses because I wanted to talk about that. So kind of mileage can vary a little bit depending on the class you're playing, but the way defenses work in this game, there's technically a lot less layers of defense than there were in POE 1. You don't have fortify. You don't have like a lot of switching your physical damage to elemental. You can do it a little bit. There's like 5% on the tree. You can get Cloak of Flames, which is 40%, but there's not a ton available. You can't, to my knowledge at least, that I've seen so far from anybody. You can't really get it as something that you can get on gear. You can get percent physical damage reduction on like shields and stuff, but that is just about that. And so let me pull up this other one here. So let's call these 3 different scenarios. I would say currently you are in trouble if you're just stacking one singular type of defense. So I'm going to call this first one, let's just say mitigation and avoidance. So an example of this could be armor and evasion as a combination. I'm playing a monk. I get a nice little ascendancy here, which I'll just log in to show you. I have a bunch of magic find gear on right now, so it's not going to be too high, but I'm pretty sure it's going to be pretty high regardless. But you have and protect me from harm, which makes it so your physical damage reduction from armor is based on your combined armor and evasion rating. This allows me to just stack evasion rating, which right now, until I get my Wind Dancer stacks up, is quite low. But with all of my normal gear on, yeah, it's just over 10,000, and I'm about 14,000 with all of that, with my regular gear on. But that also now applies to my armor, so I'm getting 77% estimated evasion chance and 70% estimated physical damage reduction. It's basically an equivalent of if I had 10,241 more armor than I do. And yeah, with all of my like full top end gear and not having magic find, which I have a decent amount of, 136% rarity currently. So with all of that kind of factored in, you get a lot of mitigation and evasion, I guess is the point I'm trying to make. So this we're going to call mit plus avoid. Another example of that is armor plus block. Block being the avoidance and armor being the mitigation. There were a lot of other ways to have mitigation in Path of Exile 1. For instance, you could have Fortify, which would give you 20% usually, just the standard baseline, just damage reduction if you had Fortify up. I would often utilize this on my Frostblade's Trickster, which was my favorite character in that, which would give me a bunch more extra defense. There was also some keystones on the tree that would apply like mitigation. And there were ways to make physical damage instead be taken as elemental damage, which would help with mitigation. And you could stack a bunch of these on top of each other and make a very defensively viable character. However, in this game, there are less forms of mitigation, and they are less reliable. The problem with just stacking armor, for instance, is unless you get absurd amounts, armor becomes less effective the bigger the hit is. So, for instance, let's just say that in Tier 15 maps, monsters do 2,000 damage physical attacks. Well, if I have over 10,000 armor, that's fine. That's going to mitigate a majority of the hit. You're only going to take small hits. So that's fine, but all of a sudden, if you start stacking different things, like what if you're against a rare monster with the physical damage aura on a map where monsters have increased physical damage, and your waypoints popped up, all of a sudden, you're getting hit for like 8,000 damage, and that 10,000 armor, it's still pretty good, but you still might take like a 2,000-3,000 damage hit, which depending on your health pool might not be particularly good. So that's something to consider. And there's also a map mod. There's almost no map mods that Brick builds in this game, except There is a mod that makes it so that monsters, when they hit you, will break your armor for 50% of the damage they do. If you're swarmed and you don't have avoidance, this can be a huge issue. I get around it entirely with having protect me from harm, because even though evasion is now factored into my physical damage reduction, lowering my armor isn't going to do anything, because I'm still going to be getting physical damage reduction based on my evasion rating instead. So they can't really, even increasing accuracy isn't going to help against that. I'll still get the mitigation. So there's a lot of imbalances in defense. So yeah, mitigation and evasion. So there's 8 enemies here. We'll just say 4 ranged, 4 melee. If you have mitigation and evasion, let's just say you have 50% of each. 50, 50. And so we'll just split these in half. These guys over here, they all hit you because of your avoidance. And they all do 50% of damage. So they're all doing half damage. So if they all did full damage, we'll just say 100, that would be 800 damage. Now 50% of them do half damage. So these 4, which would do 400, end up doing 200. So you take 200 out of 800 damage in this scenario. Nice. You're good. 200 out of 800. Okay. So that is an effective strategy. Now, let's just say you just have mitigation. What if you're just stacking armor? Cool. It can go much higher. However, there are diminishing returns, as stated previously. But let's just say you have a very high amount of mitigation, and let's say you have 70%, which, you know, is pretty reasonable. 70% would be the equivalent of just about 10,500 according to the calculations here. And these aren't accurate. There are different calculations in play, but they are estimations, and for regular mapping should be close enough that you can take that. So let's just say you have 10,500 armor. Okay, so you have all of these. You have no avoidance. They're all hitting you, and they're all doing 100 damage, so 800. So we, take 70% of 800, which is the same as 8 times 7, so 40, 16, 56, add a 0. You take 500 or you mitigate 560 damage, which leaves 240 damage. However, which is great, that's close. That's close. And mind you, with this, if I were playing Monk, these numbers would actually be like 70 and 75%. So this number would actually be much lower with a similar, well, I guess not necessarily a similar amount of investment, because I am running evasion ES. So, pretending I'm just running evasion, it could be higher, but my health pool would be lower too. And that's another factor, is that this one over here with the mitigation and evasion, probably going to have a higher health pool than if you're just stacking armor, because you're probably just going for life. But you're still, even with all of that factored in, even if we're being very generous, you're still taking 20% more damage this way. And you are now vulnerable to first of all, you become more vulnerable to map mods. Not only the armor break one, but percent damage increased ones. And damage as extra elements, because the avoidance basically mitigates that harder than pure mitigation. You're also only going to be relying on your resistances for that. So unless you're also stacking a bunch of plus res, you're going to get hit even hard. So all of a sudden, the just mitigation build becomes vulnerable to all of the negative map mods that the mitigation plus avoidance is not. Okay. And of course, you also have just avoidance. And we'll just say that avoidance has, I think your avoidance numbers like evasion go a little bit higher. So let's say you have 70. I don't know. Let's just call it 80%. Let's go. Let's say you're going crazy on the evasion, uh, and you have 80%, which is probably close to like 12 to 14,000 evasion. So let's say you have that. All right. So with 80%, that's easy. Only two of these, and actually, that's only 200 damage as well. Problem is, same thing with mitigation. You don't have any mitigation at all. So you are actually taking the full hits with these. And now rare mods, map modifiers, you become extremely vulnerable to things like plus accuracy, to extra damage auras, to map mods that give extra damage, because a lot of those are multiplicative. And all of a sudden, if you have a couple of those, this 200 damage, these are coming through. These extra ones, no matter how high you have as far as avoidance, you are simply going to take that. One of the ways I used to deal with this in the past on pure avoidance characters is I would run double avoidance. Avoidance plus avoidance, as in I would run evasion plus block, which would make it so such a small percent of the damage. So let's say I had 60% come in. That means I would either take 100 or 0 damage from the same volley of attacks. So that would help mitigate that, and all I would need was a big enough health pool to survive one big attack. I would also try to add mitigation on top of that, because even now in this game, because there's so little mitigation in the game that you can add as a defensive layer, even if you run double avoidance, you will still, even if it only happens 1 out of every 10-20 maps, every 1,000 monsters that hit you, if you have really good double avoidance, if you have excellent block and evasion, you're still occasionally going to get one shot unless you have an enormous health pool on top of that. That is a little bit of a problem. In fact, it's so much of a problem that I have seen rangers starting to go hybrid energy shield evasion. There are two things people have been doing to get around this. I mentioned one of them. They're just increasing their health pool. This is much harder to do for pure life ones. So this poor warrior stacking just armor and health, getting the shaft on so many ends here, because it is so hard to get extremely high values of life in this game, that you're really going to have a hard time overcoming the inherent weakness of just stacking mitigation. If you're running a two-handed weapon warrior, you're just in deep. You're in trouble right now. If you're running a shield one, then you're put more in this mitigation plus avoidance camp, and you're going to have a much better time. One-handed warriors, I think, are fine currently. Two-handed warriors are in deep trouble and really need to have some specialized tools or get to like insane levels of gearing to have any kind of chance. That kind of talks about our next kind of imbalance, which is, oh boy, is energy shield kind of an issue. There's just so much energy shield on the tree in such high amounts that it's almost, it's kind of a terrible idea not to run it. Like, if you are, I'll just swap into some of my other gear here to kind of get an idea. But yeah, I'm sitting here with, combined health pool of about 5,000. And yeah, now I'm rocking. I'm still running some other gear here. I don't remember all of the gear that I had swapped out previously, but yeah, that's okay. Doesn't matter. Moot point. I have some weird wrong thing here, but regardless, I should, have all this mitigation. So basically now I'm sitting at over 13k effective armor and all of this evasion. And then, but I also have a 5,000 life pool, essentially. That's going to give me a huge advantage over the warrior that has like a 3,000, 3,500 and has been stacking armor hard, but is also, let's say, hit a similar amount, like 13, 14,000. They've really leaned into the armor, gone heavily into that. This is just going to be better because I'm also just not getting hit by, 4/5 of the attacks on top of that, essentially. So I have 1,500 larger health pool, all because I'm able to hybridize, life and energy shield, and to get this huge pool. And you can go pure energy shield as well, and you can get enormous pools. There are many people easily, even on solo self-found, topping 10,000 energy shield. There's not a lot of stuff that's going to be able to kill them regardless. And the other thing that's broken about defenses is how many tools energy shield has to regen in comparison. Oh, I messed something up because I can't use my Herald of Thunder, but that's kind of a moot point. So you have things like Energy Barrier, which will cause your energy shield to recharge and not be able to be interrupted. You have things like Shock Siphon, where you kill a shocked enemy with the supported skill, you get 4% energy shield. There is Grim Feast, which a lot of people have been using. Grim Feast allows you to recover energy shield. However, it also allows you to overcharge your energy shield to double. So for instance, if I wanted to use Grim Feast here, I would just pick up all these little things off the ground when I kill things, and I could get double my energy shield, which would give me an even bigger ES pool, making myself even harder to kill. So yeah, there's just a ton. Oh, and on top of that, Ghost Dance, which once again rewards me for hybridizing my defenses. However, tools like this aren't available to every other class. They're kind of only available to, energy shield and energy shield evasion hybrids. So the problem is, and this might be fixed as more of the classes are added into the game. However, I think currently, it's just an issue that I think is kind of early access, but it also is affected by what is available defensively on the tree. There's a lot of ways you can go hybridize defenses. For instance, Mercenary has all of this like armor evasion stuff, and you can definitely just go full on armor and evasion. However, your gearing has to be a lot better than, like, for instance, if you do Protect Me from Harm. Block is actually pretty accessible and pretty strong. You can get fairly high numbers of block. Let me see if I have any shields that I can kind of show this on, but I do think I have a couple of shields here. They don't have particular block. Here you go. This one has a bunch of block chance on it. So 44% block chance is quite good, and there's a decent amount of block chance available on the tree. So block isn't particularly hard to get into and can be very helpful. So you could go, for instance, you could pick up some of the armor evasion stuff on the Merc tree, get some block, which, there's a decent amount of block just readily available all over various parts of the bottom of the tree, mostly, or exclusively, I think. Alright, so another issue I think that the game has is the way the gearing works in the end game. It feels a little snowbally for two reasons. First of all, like, in the end game, the gear that you get is just going to be much, much better. The way the tiers kind of flow, there are less tiers of gear. There's some mods that can only be rolled in, like, monster level 82 or item level 82 higher, but a lot of the really good ones can be rolled in the early 70s. So you get to a stage in mapping where you hit like level 73, and all of a sudden the gear in from monster level 73 gear, or the stuff you start getting from like your various crafters here, or from you have to go back into Act 3 Cruel, but you can gamble up to levels item level 79 gear, which, by the way, is the next kind of big breakpoint. Like, 77 through 79 has some of the top tier or second top for almost everything. Um, Once you hit these points, it becomes very easily to gear up very quickly and to get very powerful gear, comparative to what you had before. And because gear seems to be such a larger percent of your power as compared to what you have on the tree, you get a lot of power from the tree, don't get me wrong. Like, without stuff like all this extra freeze buildup and, all of my percent evasion energy shield, this character wouldn't be anything particularly strong. And that's stuff you can't get from gear. And of course, my ascendancy is doing a ton of the heavy lifting, like sunder my enemies, protect me from harm, and lead me through grace are truly what enabled this build. And without those, everything I do wouldn't be possible. But gearing starts to become a larger and larger percent. And I think for a lot of other classes, this is an even bigger problem, because I do think Invoker is one of the better ascendancies right now. I would say it's definitely in the top 4. And I would personally think it's top 2, but Invoker is kind of an anomaly in that regard. I think most classes you're getting even larger a percentage of your power specifically from your gear. And that gear becomes available in various tiers. And some of it becomes available very early on. So like you hit about item level 73, gear starts dropping. You start getting expert item level 73. Maybe it's tiered. Once you get to certain level break points, the gambler, you go back to Act 3 Cruel, you gamble. I think the gambling can be like within 2 levels or lower. So for instance, if you were level 75, you would get like level 73 through 75 gear from the gamble. And I think it goes up to level 79 or 80. So you go back, you get all that gear, and all of a sudden, mapping becomes absolutely trivial out of nowhere. You go from struggling and feeling like you're going to get one shot to just absolutely destroying everything, because the gear just kind of accelerates super quickly. I think there's a lot of reasons for that. Like, for instance, defensively, once you get higher tiers of gear, you start getting, larger amounts of resistance. Like this ring, for instance, has a ton of resist on it. You start getting catalysts, which allow you to push those resistances higher. And then you kind of are able to utilize your runes to push the damage of your weapon up and the defenses of your armor up, instead of, having to use that to struggle and get resistances in a lot of cases. So once you reach that point, the game all of a sudden just kind of becomes trivialized out of nowhere, and it continues to be trivialized until you start getting to like some of the higher tier map bosses. Once you start facing the later levels of like Breach and that kind of thing, once you start getting to maybe like the higher map boss difficulty, although at a certain point even those kind of become trivialized. I haven't engaged with all the content, but that seems to be the case. And then, of course, the pinnacle boss seems like it is very difficult for the most part. But yeah, it's just a weird difficulty scaling. I think it needs to be smoothed out a little bit. One of the things I remember playing solo Self-Found in Path of Exile 1 is how I would have like a laundry list of stuff to get character power, and I would have like breakpoints in power. I remember, okay, my character is in, breaking. I want to do like my first couple of waystones and start getting up to the point where I'm fighting Maven. But I don't have that character power in endgame yet, so I have to do these things. I have to go fight, Breach, or I have to go, or not Breach. I have to go do legions and stuff, and I have to get my certain gems in my build, and I need like certain kind of gear break points, and I need this much EHP. And I always had like a goal and a build up. In this game, you have a little bit of that. But it seems like the buildup is mostly just like get to a certain level, craft some gear, maybe do some rarity hunting to make sure you're getting, or sell some items to get some exalts, or if you're on trade, you can do it even faster. You can literally just take the exalts you have and just buy your way into the end game. And yeah, just the difficulty shoots down. You no longer have really those goals to build up into, except for the pinnacle boss, which is, I guess, the whole reason why you're getting this top tier gear. But currently, I think the pinnacle boss is balanced in such a way that you need a very specific setup with teleport, basically, to or blink, I think it's called, in order to even do the mechanics. So, yeah, I love this game. It's a great game, and I have to force myself to stop playing it, if I'm being honest. Like, making this video was difficult because I just kind of wanted to play the game. But I did want to talk about these issues I have with kind of the balance and the scaling of the game. I hope you enjoyed. Let me know if you think what you think any other glaring issues. I'm particularly interested to hear the perspective of people who've played the other classes. I've currently only played Monk and Mercenary, other than literally just getting to the first town on Ranger and Warrior. Warrior, I instantly didn't want to continue, and Ranger, I kind of want to save until I start trying to use the WASD movement, because I am still, a point-and-click mouse enjoyer, except space for movement only. Anyway, let me know what your perspective is, if you agree, disagree, if you have anything to add to any of the points I made as far as like the weird kind of pacing of the game. And yeah, this has been Ryan from Behind Eyes Gaming, and I'll see you next time. Bye.